My story happened many years ago. It happened in 1943 during the war years. I was working in Cambridge, Massachusetts. My wife and I lived in Cambridge. We lived in an apartment on the 3rd floor. One night, my wife and I drove, and then we got onto a bus and a train, and we wanted to visit some friends outside of Boston, Massachusetts. We stayed there and talked on into the evening, past 12, close to 1, and we decided it was late and we better go back. So we rode the bus and changed onto the train, and then we got back to the apartment, went up the stairs to the 3rd floor, and I felt around and found I had forgot my keys. I had left them. I said, no keys. I asked my wife if she had any. She didn't have any. How are we going to get in the apartment? It's on the 3rd floor. Can't get in the window. So I decided to look for the watchman. Found he was off duty. He had gone home at 1 o'clock. How are we going to get in our apartment? And I wondered, I had an idea. I said, the police must have loads of keys. You stay here. I'm going to walk. It's not very far to the police station. So I walked, and I got to the police station and went in. At the police station, I wrote a note, and I explained that I had forgotten my keys. I had gone to visit my friends and so on. And the policeman said, go back to your friends. I says, I can't. The bus is closed and the trains are closed. There's no way. I said, it should be easy for you. You've got plenty of keys. And the policeman said, wait a minute. And he talked with another policeman, and finally the last policeman got his coat on and his hat on, and I was wondering what was happening, and he said, come with me. So we went down and we got in his car and we drove around to the firehouse. I said, oh, stupid me. Naturally, the firehouse would have keys, not the police station. Why would the police station? Okay, the firehouse has the keys, so I should have gone there in the first place. So he got out of the car and walked around, and I was waiting. I was thinking he was going to get the keys. Then the doors opened, and a hook and ladder truck with 2 men, one driving on the front and one in the back. No, I said, there must be a big fire. They were in full clothing, all their fire gear, and the man got on the back and was driving, and the policeman came in and got in the car and started driving and noticed that the fire truck was following us with the lights glowing. Oh, I felt awful. I said, there's my apartment, 3rd floor. So he stopped, and he told the fireman, it's up there. And the hook and ladder truck parked there with its lights going. All my neighbors woke up. All the lights were going on, and I felt so embarrassed. And they got a ladder and put it up to the 3rd floor. Oh, and sure enough, they went in, they opened up the door and let us in. All I could do is say thank you very much. I felt so embarrassed. I've never been so embarrassed.
When I was born, I weighed only 3 pounds. You can't imagine how tiny I was. My mother and father would try to explain that not only were my ears not developed, I didn't even have fingernails or eyebrows. They couldn't use diapers. Instead, they put cotton wads between my legs and placed me in a cigar box. When I was born, my father and the midwife had to watch over me 24 hours a day for 3 weeks because frequently I would stop breathing. My father, who was a huge man over 6 feet tall with gigantic hands, would pinch me so that I would gasp and take in air. After 3 weeks, when I was out of danger, they told my mother. She was extremely sick herself and did not realize what a close brush with death I had had. After reaching a mere 4 pounds, my father would take care of me. My father was a mountain of a man, a cowboy type who rode horses and wrestled steer, yet he would hold me, this 4-pound creature, so gently in the palm of his hand. As I gazed up at him, I realized this is the man who worked so hard to keep me alive, whose thumbnail pressed to my chest kept me going. I take my hat off to my father. When I was 12, we moved to the faraway island of Tahiti, between South America and Australia, where my family lived for 6 years. The island was only 45 miles in diameter. The first years were very happy. It was a true paradise with swimming, canoeing, and horseback riding. Then World War II broke out, and because Tahiti was under French rule, and because France was warring with Germany, we felt the war's impact. Just to give you an idea of how badly the French soldiers needed food, the boats had stopped coming to the island, so the French soldiers would steal flour from the Chinese in order to make bread. Do you think the Chinese willingly handed over the flour to the French? No, they would harbor the flour for their own purposes. And you know how hot and humid Tahiti is. While the flour was hidden, maggots would grow in the flour. After the bread was baked, it was full of bugs, so before eating it, I had to learn how to pick them out. Over the years, the situation worsened. Large ships would come to the island to bring home the Americans who had become fearful and anxious to return to the States. But my family lived 45 miles from the capital of Tahiti, Papeete. And even though the island was only 40 miles in diameter, it was a 4-hour drive because we were continuously having to stop to contain the pigs and chickens until we arrived at the dock where passengers were signing up to reserve a boat. It was a frustrating year and a half. All the Americans had left except for our family. We couldn't get out and the situation was deteriorating. There was a food shortage, no paper or canned foods. It was a time we had to suffer through. It so happened that a French captain who was a friend of the family's asked if we would not be so frightened as to sail a small schooner only about 100 feet long. We quickly accepted and were elated to have any boat, no matter how small, which would bring us back to America. I was about 17 years old at that time and wanted to get a taste of things such as bowling, movies, boyfriends. I wanted to lead a normal life, like other kids my age. We got a boat called the Potee. We were thrilled to see the boat and found that it was an old boat, but we didn't care. However, the French government, in inspecting it, said that it was too dangerous and wouldn't allow us to take it out. We were disheartened, but the captain wasn't about to give up, and found another boat which used to belong to the Navy, a small boat with a 20-foot sail, which we converted for the 3 crew members, a few Americans, and ourselves to journey to America. I was so happy to be leaving, but before our departure, an old Tahitian man pleaded with me not to go. In asking why, he said that the Mata Rahi, a terrible hurricane, was on its way. After waiting for 2 years, I was determined to go. I said my goodbyes. He cried and said that he would never see me again. The boat left port with our pigs, which would supply our food, and barrels of water. All went smoothly until the 10th day when a huge storm hit. The tiny boat would shoot out of the water, then crash into the waves. Water poured into the boat throughout the day until it began to leak. As the mast wavered, water would pour into the mast hole. The captain told me to go down to the cabin. The water began to fill the cabin, sloshing back and forth with the movement of the boat. Frightened, the passengers began to pray. When the rocking quieted, we realized that we had gone under. I thought for sure I was going to die. I was only 17 after all. I asked my mother if we were sinking. My mother was very cool in her response. "Don't worry about going down," she replied. "The waters are blue like the heavens, the white sands like the clouds. Your hair will become seaweed, floating on the water, your teeth glistening pearls, and your bones coral." Wouldn't that be a beautiful way to die? I accepted what she said and suppressed my fears. But by miracle, the boat uprighted itself with the help of the boom and shot out of the water like a cork, and we were saved. But half of the pigs had died from drowning, so were butchered for eating. The barrels of water had overturned, and we had to drink seawater. As I look back, I have had some memorable experiences. Some years later, in 1976, I planned to travel around the world for a year. I made arrangements, but before leaving, Horty Auerbach said to me, "You know, guardian angels only watch over children and fools. Don't be a fool." As I look back, I have been a fool. It was early morning, 5 a.m., when I arrived in India. That was the 3rd month into my trip. When I got off the boat, a swarm of men rushed up to me. I told them to leave me alone, collected myself, and carried my bags to the Pan Am office, where I asked for help in getting a taxi to my destination. A man there said, "At 5 o'clock in the morning? No way. Wait until 10, when the shops and offices open, and I will call and see if your friend is there." I slept on a bench until 10, then I went back to the man, and he called to find out that I was expected, then walked me to the taxi. He loaded the bags, talked to the driver, told him where to go, checked the taxi driver's license, checked the car license tags, put down the tag number, and gave me his phone number in case she did not show up. He tipped his hat farewell and closed the door. We drove off and had not gone far when another passenger, a man, got in. I was extremely anxious. My heart was pounding. We had gone a short distance when the driver gestured to the man seated with me that I was deaf, and the man looked at me and smiled. I was so nervous I wanted to scream, but thought that would seem silly, so I sat quietly. A policeman stopped the taxi and ordered the other passenger out, leaving only the driver. Was I ever relieved! When I got to the office, the other deaf folks were overjoyed to see me and know that I had arrived safely. They had been worried. I asked if things were that bad, and they replied yes, that a British woman 2 days earlier had gotten into a taxi, and yesterday or the day before, her body was found. She had been robbed, raped, and killed, so they were concerned about my safety. They helped me settle into the YMCA, which was reasonably priced at 50 cents a day, because I had left America with only $600 to live on for the whole year. I noticed that they offered yoga classes, which I will sign like this. I was curious and wanted to get a taste of Indian yoga, because in America I had taken several courses and was always told to slow down, take it easy, not to strain myself. For 1 week I would work on limbering up, first one leg, then the other. It was a gradual process. I wanted to see what Indian yoga looked like, so I went to the hospital. They didn't believe in doctors, medicine, surgery, or the like. They believed you could be cured through yoga. I sat in line with the Indians. A nurse spotted me and was surprised to see a white woman among the others. She left, discussed this with someone, came back and signaled using the international sign for me to come over. I said, "No, I'll stay here and wait my turn." She insisted, "You come here," so I did. I had imagined that I would meet a man in a turban, long beard, white garb with legs folded under him. Instead, I encountered a man with a neat turban and clean shaven. The desk and walls were blue as well as his clothing. He was more shocked to see a white woman who was also deaf. He had no idea what to do with me. He didn't look happy about it and asked what I wanted. "Yoga." He inquired if I was sick. I said, "No, I want a taste of your kind of yoga." "No, we only accept sick people." He said, "If I want yoga, I have to come before sunup." In asking why, he said that it was the Indian philosophy. Yoga after sunup doesn't work. My knees were trembling with the thought of the dark early morning, but I put my fears aside and accepted the idea, saying that I would try anything. I left, and the next morning I tossed and turned, trying to make up my mind whether to go or not. I was frightened, but I decided to go, got up, put all my money and my passport in my desk. The clerk gestured for me not to go because it was not light yet, but I was determined. It was only about a 4-block walk, but it was very dark and misty, and the lights were dim. Anxiously I walked there, and the yoga went fine. Indian yoga is so different. He was rough, he punched, poked, and pulled, almost breaking my leg, back, and neck. For the next 3 days, I was very stiff, but what a rich experience. That became my daily routine, and by the 3rd day I was feeling very confident in myself, walking to my yoga session, when suddenly the lights went out and someone came up from behind and wrapped his arms around my neck. All I could think of was this was only the 3rd month of my world tour. I had 9 months to go. Who would carry the message of total communication? I must fight. I thought back to a friend of mine who had invited me to a women's church where the police demonstrated self-defense. I said that I didn't need it but would go for the fun of it. The policeman had asked, "What would you do if someone came up behind you and grabbed you?" "Scream and kick, I guess," was my response. We were told the best way of handling it was to bite his hands, break loose with our elbows, turn around, and kick the person. I had to think quickly, so I did just that. That's when I decided to quit going to yoga at the hospital. That incident scared me to death. That was a close brush with death. In September, I went back to India to the American Embassy. I said that I was going to Africa, and they asked what country. I listed the countries I wished to visit. One of them was Uganda. No, they replied, it wasn't safe. The American Embassy really does protect Americans, especially those traveling alone, such as myself. A fool, as usual. My second choice, Mozambique, was turned down as well. What about South Africa, I asked. Do you have someone to meet you there? They asked, to which I replied, yes. The fourth, Ethiopia, was turned down also. I have someone who can guide me. and on that note they consented with 2 exceptions, Uganda and Mozambique. Before leaving, an Indian woman came up to me with some advice. That should it happen that a black man grab you, rob you, or try to rape you, don't fight back, because they always rape and kill the women. Try to cooperate with them and suffer through it if you wish to live. That will never happen to me, I told her. She said, all right, you've been warned. I said, okay. When I went to Ethiopia shortly before the revolution, there were army tanks and guns all over. If you entered a government building, you had to be frisked for concealed bombs. I went along with it. A month or 2 later, I went to South Africa and happened to stop over in Mozambique. I was told not to get off, but had to transfer from a large to a small plane. As it so happened, upon my arrival, they had had bad weather and we were grounded. What was I going to do with myself? Just stand around? They really detest white people because in the past the Portuguese had been very, very cruel. So they shirked any white person. It was not uncommon to see signs saying Yankee go home, Imperials go home, white people go home. I would have to be very careful. With my bags I walked up to the street, but the taxis kept passing me by. A white man came up to me, and when I indicated I was deaf, he wrote a note asking if I were French, to which I replied, no. Deutsch? No, I'm not German. British? Well, I'm American. He asked if I were alone, to which I answered yes. Then he advised me never to wear gold jewelry. Thanking him, I removed my jewelry. Then he asked me where I was going, which I thought rather fresh. I'm going to a hotel. Please tell me which hotel you're going to. I went ahead and told him. He said it was pretty good and cheap, but warned me, whatever I did, not to walk alone. The 2 of us walked to the hotel. It was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. What was I going to do with myself? I found out that dinner wasn't served until 8, leaving 3 hours free. It was a bright, sunny day, and I wanted to sightsee. I didn't heed his advice and went into the streets. The town was full of communists, so there wasn't much going on. There wasn't much business. It was pretty dead. I looked around at the clothing shops. I felt very safe. I wanted to use a shortcut instead of the long way around and looked at the alley, and it was a straight shot. It didn't seem bad as I walked through the alley when 3 gunmen between the ages of 18 and 20 came up, put their hands over my mouth, held my arms, and yanked me out of sight. I could picture it. My guardian angel's wings were tired at last. This fool was finished, just as Horty had predicted. The first man started to tear off my clothes, while the second held a knife to my stomach and took my purse. All I had left was $200 and several gold earrings and a ring for my daughter. Now that was gone. I was shaking as the first man was grabbing at my clothes. The second man, with a smile, began talking at me, but he had my hands pinned so I couldn't talk. I pointed to my ear and shook my head to let him know that I was deaf. You mean you can't hear? He gestured, then told the others to get away to let me go. I didn't understand what was happening. He signed using their form of sign language to say that he had a deaf sister. A month or 2 later, I thought back to that incident. Had I not been deaf, I would have been raped and killed, or had he not had a deaf sister, I would have been raped or killed. But in such a huge world, in a small alley, the coincidence of my being deaf and he having a deaf sister saved my life. He asked me what I was doing here. I explained that I was on a world tour advocating for total communication. He explained that his deaf sister was raised using the oral method and was never happy. He helped me up and said for me to go on, to get on with my work. Can you imagine how I felt? My legs were wet with sweat, like rubber. I was so nervous. He asked if I needed help to my hotel, but I said that I could manage on my own. He knelt down and kissed my hand, saying that I was an angel. When I got back to the hotel, I broke down crying and was trembling for a good 2 hours. Several months later, while I was in Nigeria, I was recounting the story of what had happened to me in Mozambique to some friends I was visiting. I told them what a coward I was for crying. How is it, they said, if you were a coward, that you stayed 2 or 3 months longer instead of going straight home?
It was one summer, 1938. It was a real hot summer. I was getting on a bus, a Greyhound bus, in Texas. I got in and sat down, and there was a man next to me. He was a middle-aged man, a hearing guy. He started talking to me. I let him know I couldn't hear. So we were riding along in the bus all across Texas, and it was real hot. The hours went by, and finally the bus stopped. So people could get out to stretch their legs and get something to drink. I got out and stretched my legs. It was very hot that summer, and the man who was sitting next to me came back, and he had an ice-cold Coke. It had ice in it and everything. I said, thank you, and I drank it. It was so good. I was sweating, and the Coke was cool. And I had bought a magazine, a Saturday Evening Post, and I was reading it for a long way. And I was drinking the Coke, and everybody had gotten on the bus, and we were going along, and I was thumbing through the magazine, and I thought, I really didn't thank him properly. I wanted to let him know that I really appreciated his kind thoughts, so I didn't have any paper on me. So on the magazine that I just recently bought, there was a white area, and I wrote on it, I can't remember exactly what I said. It was something like, thank you for being very kind, and I appreciate that Coke, something like that. And I handed it over to him, and he took the magazine, and he looked at it for a very long time. It was a short sentence, and he had it for a few minutes, and I waited, and he looked at me and smiled, folded the magazine, stuck it under his arm. That was the last I saw of my magazine.
I want to tell you about Rudy and me. But hold it a moment. Rudy who, you ask? Oh, by the way, Rudy is spelled with an I, R-U-D-I. Rudy is a dog. He's a Doberman Pinscher. He's black and rust-colored. Beautiful, big dog. But he wasn't mean, oh no. I was training him to become a show dog. And I want to tell you a little bit about that. How I got that dog is really a long story. I was feeling ready for a change. I started to consider a pet because I had this friend who had some Dobermans. He invited me to a dog show, and there I saw all these different kinds. But after seeing my friend's dog, the Doberman, looking so noble with colors so bright, it looked very dignified. I looked at them and decided, yeah, that's the kind that I want to buy. So I asked my friend where I could buy one. He told me, don't buy it from someone you don't know. It's always best to go to a breeder. Don't buy it from someone who is selling it privately or from a pet store. A pet store doesn't mean that the quality is necessarily good. So I found a breeder who specialized in Dobermans, and I went to him. He showed me a litter, and I saw all these different kinds of Dobermans, and a little one came up, really cute, and I was taken by it. But the breeder told me never to pick the first one that approaches. He picked one for me. And I said, how do you know that's the right one for me? That again is a long story. But I decided to trust him, and he gave me the dog. Do you know how much it cost? You think just a few bucks? Now this was some time ago, and it was somewhere around $350. Really, that much. So I brought it home, and I bought a book on training and got some advice from my friends. I was overenthusiastic and didn't know what I was doing and bombarded my friends with questions. But my friend warned me not to train it immediately, except for some things like basic rules of the house and toilet training and so on. But the other ones have to wait until later. Right now, I should just let the dog enjoy its puppyhood. They too have a right to grow up and have fun. Then later, when they become an adult, you can train him in more serious things. Right now, they're just like kids. I should wait until he was about 8 or 9 months old. That's when they become adults for the more serious training. So I decided to wait, but in the meantime, I only toilet trained him in things like that. How to come to me when he called, when I called him. And during that 8 months, I signed to the dog all the time. I never used my voice, except for outside when I would whistle to call the dog. When the time finally came where I began to really train the dog seriously, I went to someone to train him for me, but I found out that this trainer was going to train me. I would then in turn train the dog. I was the one who was going to get the lessons. So I went for 2 or 3 weeks learning how, picking up their gestures that they use for their commands. Then I would add my own later. I'll show you some that the dog knew, like this means lie down. This means like that. And this means sit. This means come. And this one means to go. On like that. And also I added a few of my own. Like when I did this or this. Here he would crawl under something. And when I signed this, he would jump over something. Also, there was a sign that I taught him related to food. Well, actually it was finger spelling. I would tell him to sit and stay somewhere out of the kitchen. I would not allow him in the kitchen. And after preparing the food and setting it on the floor, I would fingerspell O-K-A-Y. And he knew it was okay to come in and eat. As I told you before, when I told him to sit, of course I would use the same gestures that breeders use with their index finger pointing down. And he would just, at that time, sit down on his haunches. But I used other signs too, because the dog was very, very bright. If I signed it like this, he would go and sit on our sofa. But if I signed it over to my left, he would sit on this like small love seat. He knew, depending on where I made the sign, exactly what piece of furniture to sit on, whether it was over to my left or over to my right. He could follow all of that. I also taught him how to bark on command. I would not tell him to speak or anything, but I would use this sign and he would bark. He did many things like that for me. Now my purpose in training him was, first, for my own enjoyment, and secondly, to become a show dog. You know, to travel to different tournaments and dog shows, like make it a hobby. But when I learned more about it, I found out it was very competitive, highly complex, and very professional. Usually the person that actually shows the dog in the tournaments is not the owner himself. You hire a specialist who is called a handler, and that person is a paid professional. The handler actually does the show. I could do it, but it's best for the specialist to handle the dog. However, I could take my dog to novice dog shows. And the first novice dog show that I went to and I handled my own dog, he won first place. Can you imagine that? Rudy, first place. So I continued going to novice dog shows, and he continued to win. Always first or second place. After 6 or 8 months, we started going to higher and higher level tournaments. And we continued winning first and second place, almost never third. He had just a perfect body, perfect teeth, eyes, pointed ears, and a beautifully trimmed tail. Just the perfect dog. So I started to consider participating in a really advanced dog show, and I asked my friend about it. He suggested I go see the breeder where I bought Rudy and get some advice from him. So I brought him over and he asked me to show him what the dog can do. So I had Rudy roll over and basic stuff like that, using signs of course, never using voice. The breeder was very impressed. But what impressed him the most was what they call the long stay. And what happens there is the dog is told to stay in one place while the person giving commands goes out of sight for a whole hour. That's the toughest because the farm was crawling with Dobermans at play, a temptation possibly too big for Rudy to resist. The breeder wanted to see if he could do that, so after showing him this long list of all the tricks that Rudy could do, I told him to sit and then stay. The two of us, the breeder and I, went out of sight where the dog couldn't see us. We sat down and talked, drank a few beers, chatted for a while, almost 40 minutes. And when I decided to check, there Rudy was, sitting there, just looking around with his eyes. So I went back and drank a little bit more, and after a full hour we decided enough. There he was, head down on his paws, but nevertheless alert because his ears were moving around. Finally, I clapped my hands and told him he could come. He went around behind me and sat on my left side, just as he should whenever I call him to come. And there is one time when I use my voice, and that's to say okay, and that means his duties are over and he can play. So I said, okay, and remember this is different from spelling okay like I do in the kitchen. So I said okay, and he jumped up on me and licked my face and played. So the breeder said, let's go ahead with a big-time dog show. This tournament was called a regional dog show, and it involves the states of Maryland, Delaware, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. Owners and breeders from all over this 5-state area come to compete. We arrived and everyone was getting ready, signing up until starting time. Well, actually, you have to register before, but I had sent in my application. So the time came to begin. I had hired a professional, an expert handler in the field. And I had to teach him a few things, train him in how to give commands with Rudy, because Rudy knew slightly different gestures of commands. And after giving him a little, warm-up on how to take care of him, he handled it himself. What happens is that the dogs form in a circle, and they parade around, and the judges stand in the middle and point out 4 dogs, first, second, third, and fourth place. So as they were parading around, my dog was selected. But this is not the finals, you understand. This was only the elimination process. This elimination happens 4 times, and Rudy made it all the way through to the finals, which happened in the late afternoon. So the dogs were parading around that last time. I was a little bit nervous and kept telling myself I wouldn't win, and well, it wasn't important. Just watch and see what happens. And they were parading around in the circle, and the judge turned around and pointed right at Rudy the first time. Rudy! Boy, I was so happy. He really won the championship for the regional. And that means eligibility for the next higher level, which is a national dog show. But a sad thing occurred that kept me from going on. All this time this was happening, I had been making plans to move to New York, and I knew I couldn't bring Rudy with me. Later on, I remembered that during that regional championship, a man had come up to me and asked if I'd be willing to sell the dog. He wanted to buy Rudy, for he was a breeder who wanted to breed Rudy to build a championship line. And at the time I told him, no, I wasn't interested in selling. But later, when I realized I had to move to New York, and I really shouldn't bring Rudy with me, I decided, okay, I'd have to sell Rudy. So I sold him, and it hurt me a lot. Boy, it really hurt.
I would like to tell you a true story that happened at the Minnesota School for the Deaf when I was 13 years old. I come from northern Minnesota, which is mainly rural, and there are almost no libraries or books around, yet I loved to read. So when I started going to this school and I saw the size of the library, I wanted to read all of the books, which was just fine with the people there. I was thrilled, and I immediately checked out 5 books. I would read every chance that I got. But the dorm counselor didn't like me with my head buried in a book all the time. So she told me that I had to be with the other kids more. I didn't understand her attitude because one Saturday, although I had already cleaned my room, she still wouldn't allow me to read. So I snuck into the reading room thinking she would leave me alone there, but no. Again, she told me not to read. So I tried to talk with the other kids, but all I wanted to do was read. So I kept looking for some way that I could read more. One day I was walking home from classes, and I realized that at the top of Tate Hall, which was the women's dorm, there was a copula. Ah, I thought to myself, if only I could get up there, that dorm counselor would never see me reading. So I went back to my room, dropped off my school books, and when the coast was clear, I snuck up to the attic where the old trunks were kept. Oh, it was pitch black there. I felt my way around the room until I spotted a patch of light coming from above. Deciding to go for it, I started up the metal grinder, pulling, inching my way up, until I reached the ladder above it. And then there was one more ladder above that, and then the trap door. On the other side of the trap door was a perfect little room with plenty of light. My counselor would never find me here. I decided this would be just right, and I went back down. The next Saturday morning, and there were 4 more to come, I hid my books inside my clothes, and I scurried off to my secret place. I was so absorbed that before I knew it, it was 20 till 12. I had to go back and get in the lunch line. We had one line that was for boys and one line for girls. The timing worked out just fine. Now, on the 5th Saturday, and I should have suspected that something was up, because my counselor stuck close to me while I cleaned. But I didn't suspect anything, and when I was done with my duties, I snuck upstairs and became totally engrossed in my reading, finishing 1.5 books in 3 hours. I'm a fast reader. Well, at my regular time, 20 till 12, I prepared to leave, and when I removed the trap door, I saw a light on below me. There was my counselor and the superintendent looking up at me. The superintendent said, "Please be careful." They both looked so tiny from where I was. It was scary, but I told them not to worry about me, and I began my descent. But first I took a good look around the room because I knew that this would be the last time that I would see it. I climbed onto the ledge, and starting down the first ladder, I realized that it was balanced on one narrow piece of wood. And the ladder itself was pretty flimsy. I hadn't ever seen this before because I always went up and down in the dark. But I had to go on. The second ladder was sturdier, yet very long, and I hadn't ever seen this one in the light before either. I reached the last part of my descent, which was the grinder, and I worked my way down to the bottom, carefully inching my way down. And there I was on the ground with the 2 of them. Oh, my counselor was furious. "Why were you up there?" she demanded. "Because I wanted to read and you wouldn't let me," I told her. The superintendent turned and asked her why that was so. Her response was, "She reads too much." Well, the superintendent looked at the two of us and told us that from then on I could read in his office, and the three of us left that place. Sure enough, on Saturday mornings I went straight to his office, where he had set up one little corner especially for me, with a chair and a light and everything that I needed to read, and I spent all of my Saturday mornings there from then on. I really appreciated that, and I read 6 rows of books from the library. I would never criticize anyone if they wanted to read. I hope that all of you have learned to love books like I did, and that you still do.